Mediopolis, Chapter 4. Are we not all strangers unto each other? Are we not all learning about each other? The elderly man was there with the home comforter who'd visited him. They were there talking again at the table in his room. The table had whirled once more to its usual position under the window, besides the clearly vented out area, with the wheeled chairs on either side. "So you're not happy, but you're not that sad being alone," began the home comforter, after all the jobs were done yet again, after yet another visit. She had the proposals now for him to look through more fully. "Yeah, of course I'm alone, of course I am. Wouldn't you be? Wouldn't anyone be?" he said, as if almost offended by the question itself. "Well, why are you so alone then, so much of the time?" she asked, uncertain, looking around. "Because I don't know how to interact with people anymore. I don't know how to be with people, or to be on shows with people. You don't need to," she said. "You can learn to do it again. You can start again. However long you've been without a show, or without a family." She looked at him imploringly, but he was looking, staring down to space, to a distant place almost, like he was so many times before, distantly looking out into space. "I just have to deal with it. I just don't want others to have to see me this way. I don't want to be a burden to others," said the older man. You're not a burden to me," said the home comforter. "No," he said, looking up to her. "Well, what am I then?" And he looked at her imploringly, searchingly. "I don't know," she said after a thought. "A strange, interesting person, I suppose." "Oh, you had to take so long to say person." "Well, because you're the one that said we may not be people, but spirits or something, wasn't it? Isn't that your belief?" "I said we were spirits having a human experience. Yes, when we first met." "Well, exactly. So that's why I didn't know what to call you. I mean, you are a person, I know that, but what did you do call yourself?" "Of course I'm a person," said the old man stubbornly, angrily suddenly. "But I'm a strange person to you. Is that what I am? To study? Something, some obscure thing?" No, you're something interesting, something a little funny, something a little sad, if I'm honest, sometimes, but a little friendly as well. We have gotten a little friendly over the months, haven't we?" she asked him, looking back to him questioningly. "Yeah, of course, yes," he said after a little pause. "Of course, yes, we have gotten a little friendly," saying it almost too many times, as if to try and convince himself as much as her, though clearly they still had their doubts about each other, though. "Well, thanks, I'm just, what did you say, a strange person?" No, I said you were a strange, interesting person. Something to study. Well, we are all things to study," she said reasonably, now having a straighter face. She'd been a little smiling before, but he clearly didn't see the funnier side of her thoughts. She'd only meant it as a joke. "Well, you're not that funny, really. I mean, even the dinosaurs know your jokes," she said. And he didn't laugh, though, almost snorted. "Huh," he said, crossing his legs, sitting opposite her, grunting a little. "Anyway, we had a laugh together, sometimes, a little," she said, by way of explanation, trailing off, looking out the window from him now. "Yes, I guess we're interesting subjects, a little, to each other," concluded the old man, feeling embarrassed now that he tried to question her on something perhaps that was too serious to answer in such a casual manner, or so easily. "I'm sorry about my dwellings earlier. I mean, my sadness going on." "It's all right," she said. "I'm used to the sermons of gloom by now," she said, looking back at him, with a trace of a little humour. "Haven't converted you yet, then?" he said, glancing at her. "Subverted me, perhaps, sometimes, perhaps." She gave him a fake smile, then looking over at the cluster of books gathered on the table that just didn't seem to go together that well. Why had he gathered them together in such a curious fashion anyway? "Perhaps we've subverted each other," said the old man, raising his eyebrows in mock pretense, of course, playing along. Seriously, though, and the young woman stopped smiling then when he said this, unsure if he was serious. I'll try and be more positive in future. I'm sorry, I get too negative about all the things going on, explained the old man now, wanting to give a positive conclusion to the discussion that they'd had earlier. Yes, there are happy trials, stated the home converter. You know that, she said. There are many happy trials as well as the sad ones, she said almost through gritted teeth, stating the young woman, making sure that she collected all of the smartphone devices from the visit that she'd been on. Aren't there really such things as happy trials and happy show trials even? Asked the old man, bemused, looking up to her, almost wanting to help her gather all the different machines together, the devices that she needed for the information to take on, but he didn't really know what it was. Of course, you were always talking about funny trials. In the early days, when I used to visit you, there were hilarious trials. The funny show trials. You forget all about them, said the home carer, buzzing around him now and leaning over him to pick up one of the devices to his side, nearby him. They were funny trials that you used to talk about, not all the sad ones all the time, and all the bloomin' angry ones. I'm getting tired of all the angry trials, and all the bloomin' confusing trials as well. That's all there's ever been recently, she complained at him. Honestly, he looked at her, gathering up all the different devices that they needed together for the work during their session together, cleaning up around him, stretching over and around him, talking over him as if she was his mother or something. Of course, he realized and felt that she meant well, even though he perhaps felt she didn't really understand him as well as she felt she did. Of course, you were always talking about the funny trials, she repeated to him. Ah, but they were long ago, a long time ago, and a lot's happened since then, he said, almost in defence of himself. It was too serious, too many things to make light of, he said, by way of explanation, though he didn't actually explain what those things were. Maybe if you went on a different kind of trial, or watched different trials. What about a love trial? She suddenly suggested, having grabbed the last of the devices, now all gathered together in a bundle, pushed out stretched before her on the table, so she could wind them all back in, and then put them placed nicely, neatly, within her digital handbag. You know, you could try a different kind, a love trial. There are such things. She looked over at him, a little bemused, wondering how he'd react. She disclosed something to him. He didn't know much about love trials, though, and she went on animatedly. It's not a show trial as such. You know, I'm not saying it's a showmance, because a lot of it's not shown on the actual show itself. But the love shows, you know, they give you a place where you can actually talk to others. Oh no, began the old man, suddenly knowing where it was going. Oh no, I'm not going on any show dates. You've got to be joking, he stated seriously, and he looked at her with pensive eyebrows, shot her a serious look across the table. I'm too old for show dancing or any of that show dating nonsense, he said in a serious tone, though she smiled at it, taking it that it was an almost mock serious tone. Perhaps he really was just acting, and maybe he did want to go on, and just didn't want to admit it. There are old show dates, she said slowly, almost teasingly. The young woman now. No excuses. There's centurions out there finally finding love still, so you're never too old to go on a date show. There are always older dating shows, she said to him slowly, now putting the last of the devices into the digital handbag that she now swung round her shoulder, fastening it on so that it wouldn't get jolted off during the traffic later. Yes, of course, in the arms of a paramedic, probably, is where I'm likely to be found, snorted the old man, staring back to her briefly. In some angry sort of jest he said it, although was it really just a jest? His ratings had fallen, slumped almost, in recent months, and a little more recently. He did get a few sympathy votes, it's true, but his rudeness sometimes, his callous, thoughtless recklessness, he just shot out offensive things sometimes without really thinking. That probably cost him some votes and downplayed him sometimes. So his ratings no doubt had dwindled, especially if he was so often rude to the other home carers that visited. Well, he could do it with her, because she didn't mind so much. But he'd seen already his rudeness that had affected the audience and also many other visitors. No wonder so few had visited in more recent times. Well, he did get those sympathy votes because he was often quite ill as well, and often was quite sad for good reason. But why was he so often rude? She'd not wanted to address that. No, not with the audience present, nor with the other visitors, perhaps. Okay, well, there are rarer cases. And lots of older people do find love. Lots and lots, restated the younger woman. Yes, they do, said the older man after brief thought. I have watched Old Love Show, and others find love on it, I don't doubt it. But I don't necessarily need to, he began. You're not looking for it, though. You're not really searching for that love. You can't just expect it to track you down. Love doesn't find you. You've got to find love, stated the woman. And she stopped in her ruminations, in trying to sort out where everything was in the bag, staring to him lucidly now. Almost like she was trying to appeal to him, reach out to him, implore him to do something about it. Okay, but you seem to forget that I've been ill, and I'm very old, and I've got a lot wrong with me at the moment. I'm in a lot of pain, he restated once more. Yes, but you're not quite dead yet, and not quite dying. I know you've got a lot of serious issues, began the home carer. I'm not saying it wouldn't be a challenge. Of course it would, and others would have to help you. And you will need to support yourself much more, sir, she said, quite seriously, giving him a more serious acting look now, poised, sat there almost searchingly, almost lovingly, as she stared at him, and he gave her a quick glance. Yes, he nodded, and took her seriously. I could even help you with the applications to go on some of the love shows, she suggested quickly. Leave them with me, and I will think it over like I said, restated the old man, as if in a mood about that, because he said earlier on many times that he would read it all over and consider the proposals earlier on. The old man looked down at the information in front of them. She'd sent him the smart book, old date show, dream mance, old showmancers, and a number of other programs too, ones that she considered relevant for his needs, apparently. The computer program company that she worked for, of course, they'd sent it to her to suggest to him, as part of the job, no doubt. Desperate Bachelor's Show, he said, finally scanning and looking at the number that he just thought was awful. What? He said, looking up from the list, seeing and being a little offended at that name on the list. After scanning the long list of potential love shows to go on, there were just too many really to consider, a bewilderingly long list. Those were just the ones that her and the programs thought were serious for him, or thought were right for him. He would have to look through them and look at their reviews too, to give them and their ratings some consideration later, when he had more time alone, without distractions. Honestly, do you think I'd go on Desperate Bachelors, a show like that? Is that what you think of me then? What? Stated the old man, not sure whether it was a joke or actually some serious criticism that she put it in there as a test or some. Don't knock it, she said. I know it's got a weird title, but actually a lot of people do find love on there. And there's no shame in being desperate. We all can be sometimes. Desperate people need desperate help, and if you to find desperate love, why not? Some people find love on there, she said, with raised eyebrows, as an explanation. And she was hopeful about this, as if trying to allure him more into it. Find out more about the show before you judge it, because actually it's got a lot of interesting things about it. And, well, I'm not that desperate. Yes, but you are a bachelor, and you have been a long time, and you're desperately sad. You told me that much yourself, she restated. as if she was the prosecution and it was a crime to be sick or sad somehow. That may well be. I may well be desperate, but I know nothing of the show, admitted the older man. Well, take time, look at it. But there's loads of other shows on there. What about the old date shows? Dreammancer. Oh, my old uncle was on that. Well, he didn't actually find his partner through that, but some good friends, though. Just take your time to look at them. I'm only saying think about it. No one's saying you've got to do it. There's no pressure or anything. Just take your time and, think about it, the home carer suggested, pushing over once more towards him on the table the number of brochures, the proposals from the different love shows and the different show trials. I said I will think about it already, he said, putting the pile to one side, placing them next to the other pile of proposals too. There were only a small that would really be relevant to his actual needs once he sorted through them himself. Don't not going on those shows, honestly. It's better than being on a dead show or a dying show or something, she said finally, looking back to all the information she was looking at on the small computer she had on her hand. I'm not sure that it would be that bad, personally, to be on a dying show. I'd rather have fewer people than have lots of people watching an awful show, said the older man. I mean, I'd rather just a few people watching. I don't care if there's large numbers watching, even if it's popular. If it's a terrible show and I couldn't do it, or it's that awful, I won't do it. Nobody's saying you've got to do it or anything, restated the home carer once more. There's no pressure or anything. I'm just giving you these to look at. The company suggested you'd find them very useful. The algorithms suggested. I know all that, interrupted the old man finally, and I've said that I will look through them. It seemed that they were having almost some sort of argument between them, as if he wanted to look and was interested, intrigued, and curious about the things and the suggestions, but was a little offended perhaps by some of the titles, the names of the things, though there were long lists of names and things within that he was complimented by too, and so he wasn't sure how to react to all the different labels and names that she'd given him, information she felt, or their company she worked for felt, would be useful for him. Well, I said that I will look into it all when I've got more time. Well, you've certainly got a lot of time to consider it all, she reminded him. You don't want to end up on one of those heartbroken shows, or one of the lonely shows. Oh, they're the saddest, she said, and an aunt of one of those. Heartbroken shows for the lost and lonely. It's basically a show about a person and how they've been living on their own for months on end. It's just, it just gets so tedious and boring. And it's just watching them talking about other people, talking about their memories, talking about their families. It's just long monologues that seem to go on forever, really, stated the woman, reminiscing about one of her aunts who'd happened to be on a heartbroken show. But that was long ago. She didn't know many friends that were on heartbroken shows, just a few of them, but there weren't shows that she'd watched that often, really, only because it was a close aunt that she'd known back then, that she'd watched much of the show. I think the lost shows perhaps were much sadder. The lost shows, they were even sadder than the heartbroken show, although who knows what they were even about. They were madness, some of them. They seemed to lose all awareness of the world amid those on the show, speculated the older man. Well, I wasn't suggesting to go on them, just that they always were. Just that they were always worse shows, stated the woman. There were what? Said the man. There are always worse shows that you could go on. You know that the one you're living on. Imagine if you were on a heartbroken show, the one that my aunt was on, I told you about, where she had to look at pictures of people that had passed away and could only look at those pictures for months on end. It was like the grieving show, never mind a heartbreak show. She came out of it stronger and better, but it was a terrible thing she went through. She needed therapy just to get over it all. I mean, you could be on a show like that. I'm not suggesting anything like that for you. Even Desperate as Bachelors or whatever it's called. It's better than that, isn't it? Yes, I suppose so, said the older man, not wanting to be reminded of hundreds of other potentially worse shows that he could be on. Yes, I suppose there are much worse shows that any of us, or that I could be on, he conceded finally. All right, well, I was just suggesting to look at some of the shows. I'm sorry if you were offended by some of the suggestions, said the home carer, feeling that he was a little oversensitive, since she wanted to give him a fuller perspective of as many of the suggestions, knowing that a few perhaps would not be as relevant as they could be potentially. I wasn't suggesting to go on all of those shows. It's just a broad spectrum of things that could be perhaps relevant, she tried to explain. Yes, there's always potentially a lot worse shows I could be on, said the older man, as if he was still thinking about the Lost show, the Lonely shows, and all the heartbroken shows, ones that he had witnessed and viewed sometimes. Well, sometimes he watched lonely shows, sometimes he watched friendly shows, sociable shows, sometimes he watched the family shows. It varied. Different times of the day, he watched quite different shows, really. He had watched many of the lonelier shows, not just dwelling on the heartbroken shows, not those especially, but some of the lonely shows he did watch occasionally. When he felt lonely himself, he sometimes watched other people's lonely shows too, so that he could relate to their loneliness himself. He, being a lonely man that had spent some time being alone, he could relate, therefore, to other people's challenges in going through their times, in their episodes of loneliness also. So he did watch many other lonely shows, but he didn't want to dwell on all that with the young visiting, sociable, friendly home carer visiting. No, he didn't want to tell her about the countless hours and months he'd spent watching about other people's lonely shows and their lonely struggles. There's always potentially much better shows and much worse shows, the older man said to her, trying to have a neutral summing up position to move away from dwelling on too much on all the sadder, lonelier, heartbreaking shows. The ones that perhaps she wasn't aware or didn't watch as regularly as he'd done sometimes. The old man sometimes felt like he needed to sum up and to say something reassuring, not perhaps just to himself, but to her. By the way, I think you'd make a really nice show carer if ever you got onto a show, one of the care shows or something, he finally said to her, trying to give her a compliment, something to sweeten her up or to relax her, to reassure her more, because she did seem edgy with him sometimes. Well, he did say rude and pointed things, thoughtless things, tactless things, without thinking sometimes. I think you really would be good on a good show care. Just find the right care show, and that's, you're a great show carer. You make a great show carer, sorry. The older man tried to say as a compliment, not sure if it really came out as one, really, though. The old man fidgeted, unsure about her, not being one of the regular home carers that he knew that well, though. A nice home carer? She asked him, looking up again, eyebrows raised, unsure, looking at him strangely. Just nice? Well, yes. No, you're a great show carer. Sorry, you've been a lovely show carer. A friendly show carer, even. I know you may not have greatest experience to go on to the greatest of show carers, but there will be a great show carer, and you are a great show carer. He said, almost slightly embarrassed now, looking away. Well, I was a good show dancer, she said after a while of pause. You know that because you saw the videos. I loved show dancing. Show carrying isn't really my thing. It's not, I just do it because show dancing doesn't really make the money, she said finally as an explanation. I'm not really that great as a show carer, not really. It's nice of you to say that. I try, but I'm really a show dancer. That's what I love. That's what I did. I did it for years. But I just do the show dancing occasionally. It just doesn't pay as much, and I don't need to anymore. I'm focused on the family, and I've also got a lot of other things going on. So I do other jobs like the show caring, and that's just what I've gotten to do the last few years, really. So I never was a great show carer. I was a show dancer, and you've seen the videos anyway. You know that. Yes, of course, said the old man, after listening to the long explanation that the home carer suddenly felt the need to give to him, in many ways to defend her own honour, because she felt it was wrong to accept his flattery, that she didn't feel that she was a good home carer, and that she'd really done that much for him. You really would be a good home carer. I'm sure you'd make a great show carer somewhere, he tried to restate again. Well, I wish I could get back into show dancing again. There just wasn't the money in it, not the type of show dancing I used to do. But I just got to go where I go, said the home dancer again. The old man smiled now, thinking about her doing different work when she was younger. Well, if I was well again, I'd join you in a show dance. Not that I could keep up or do that even when I was younger, he added. Well, get well, eventually, she said, and we could go on a show dance one day. I do show dances still. I do show dancing with a group of elders in one of my classes. You could always watch us still. Well, they're a funny old group. Some of them make up their own dances, actually, to be honest. But you really got to curate the dances around their special needs because they're so elderly and they often have so many different needs in combination. But it's always possible so long as you get to know the needs and their abilities really well. She said it with a small smile on her face, as she almost was looking over and thinking over some of the memories of the old routines. Well, send me some of the links of the pictures, said the man, looking over the pictures that she was looking through, scrolling through. And he was smiling a little at the thought of the pictures, and smiling just at her smiling too. Yes, it will be interesting to sort of watch more about your dancing and see more of what it was about, he said, trying to be polite. Listening in and watching, looking at some of the costumes and some of the choreographed movements as the various individuals made their steps in the groups and the groups performed, choreographed in their routines. He wasn't really sure much about dancing or what to make of it all, really. A strange gallivant around the stage, shaking various things about, moving in various weird, strange ways to a strange rhythm. What kind of dance she did, he wasn't sure about it, really. He didn't want to watch much of the show dances, though. Not when he couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't in a long time. Well, he couldn't dance that he'd once done, and even then he wasn't really a specialist of the dance shows, knew nothing about it all much. The old man returned to the room, alone, listening to some debating show now, looking away from her and the dance shows that she'd been showing him on the small screen that she held with her, carried on her small remote viewer. Whilst having the first of the medications that the visiting home carer had arranged for him and given to him. It took a while to take full effect, though. The home carer, then, having completed the various visits, and before returning home herself, then loud sounds of cheering and laughter had come up from a room, and she popped her head up from the door. The children were sat around, watching animal shows and laughing. She was watching them distantly and could see that they were watching the different animal shows, that were laughing. They were laughing at them, getting a little sad occasionally, and even cheering them on occasionally, and roaring with laughter sometimes. She was able to remotely watch them and see her own children, to see what programs they were watching, and to see them with the childminder that she'd left behind them with, to see them with one of their aunts or uncles, one of the friends of the family that she knew well, to see that they were okay, and to monitor them, to remotely view them from the small machine that she carried, the visual recorder, so that she could look back at the children from time to time during her visits to the elderly, so that she could see how the children and how also the visitors that she'd left them with were. Well, they all seemed to be getting on okay, so she looked away from them and was able to give her attention and focus back to the older man again, having shown him briefly also some of the dance videos on the machine from her previous work on the dance shows that she'd done. The home carer had now completed many of all of the visits that she'd done, so it was time to look back and see how all the visits had gone on, and she was going to then do a review of how the visits had gone on, and also discuss with the person themselves how they felt the visit had gone.